The night she came in, I had 4 units of O-negative in the cold locker, 2 pressure cuffs that worked, and a station assistant named Corvith who was 50 meters away fixing a filtration seal that couldn't wait. I was alone. 2 Velserath soldiers carried her in and set her on the intake table. Then they stepped back and put their hands at their sides, the way soldiers do when they've run as far as they can run, and there's nothing left to carry. One of them had a pressure wrap on her forearm, leaking through. The other looked fine on the outside, which meant her injuries were inside, which meant she'd been running on alone for however long it took them to get here. The woman on the table wasn't moving. I didn't ask names. I don't ask names when someone is that color. The Velserath don't read as human, but they're close enough that the vitals make sense to someone who's been doing trauma work on border moons for 11 years. Her skin, a deep copper bronze that catches light like old metal when she's healthy, had gone the wrong way. Too cool. Her breathing was shallow enough that I had to watch for a full 4 seconds just to confirm she was doing it at all. I got her on monitoring and started the assessment. Inside 90 seconds, I found it. Penetrating abdominal trauma. Left side bleed that had been packing itself against the rib and slowly losing that fight. Someone had field dressed it well. It hadn't been enough. I needed blood. All I had was compact standard O-negative, human blood. For units, because border installations run lean. No matched Velserath product. The nearest facility that might carry it was 4 hours at Hardburn. She didn't have 4 hours. She didn't have 1 hour. She might have had 40 minutes. Here's what I knew. Cross-species transfusion between humans and Velserath have been documented in medical literature going back 60 years. Not standard practice. Carries risks. Cascade effects are unpredictable, in some individuals severe. But the literature was clear. It had been done, and in roughly 70% of documented cases, it bought enough time to stabilize until matched product arrived. 70% is not a certainty. It's also not nothing when the alternative is watching someone die on your table because you were too cautious to try. I put the line in. The taller soldier, the one with the wrapped forearm, said something in Velserath I didn't catch. The other answered in trade common. She is a third daughter of House Velserath. She was returning from negotiations at Kevvarun when a faction ambush hit the transport. I don't need the politics, I said. I need to know if she has any documented drug sensitivities. A pause. None on record. I ran the first unit, monitored for cascade. There was a brief temperature spike, a slight inflammatory response. I treated it. It resolved. The second unit went in without incident. Her pressure started coming back. By the third unit, she was breathing the way someone breathes when they're fighting to stay alive, rather than losing that fight. That's a distinction you learn to read when you've been doing this long enough. Corvith came in from the outer bay around the second hour. He took over monitoring while I worked. We didn't speak much, because there wasn't much to say. We'd done this before, the two of us, in rooms like this one. The conversation in those rooms is mostly hands and instruments and the particular silence of people concentrating. By the 4th hour, she was stable. By the 6th hour, she was conscious. She didn't speak to me at first. She looked at the ceiling with her pale amber eyes open and very still. I recognized that look. I've seen it on soldiers and contractors and survey workers who come close enough to the edge that they're still measuring the distance back. I let her look at the ceiling. When she finally turned her head, she didn't say thank you. She said in trade common, with the careful precision of someone who has spoken it long enough to choose words exactly. What did you use? I told her. She was quiet for a long time. Human blood, she said. Compact O-negative. You were bleeding out. The cross-species literature gave me better odds than watching you die. She looked at the ceiling again. Her jaw was set. That expression I'd learned, over 11 years on board installations, to read as someone processing information they don't have a prepared response for. Is it a problem? I said, it may become one, she said. What is your name? I told her. She repeated it slowly. Soren Vale. The way people repeat a name when they're filing it somewhere specific. She slept through most of the next 2 days, which was the right thing to do. I ran the follow-up work and found no cascade effects beyond what I'd already treated. The transfusion had, by every clinical measure I could apply, worked cleanly. The soldier stayed. The one with the wrapped forearm told me her name was Sorvith. She let me read Dresser Wound on the second day and didn't flinch, which told me she was either very controlled or in less pain than she was letting on. With Velserath warriors, it's usually both. On the third day, Ethan Velserath sat up without help and asked for something to read. I gave her the station operations manual, the nearest thing to hand. She read it in what appeared to be a single sitting, with the focused attention of someone who treats reading as a task, not a pastime. I found this more unsettling than anything that had come before. You expect someone who was bleeding out 3 days ago to spend recovery looking out windows. You don't expect them to be taking notes in the margins of your operations manual. Your filtration maintenance schedule is behind. She said that afternoon. Corvith is working on it. Section 12 specifies a 14-day cycle. Your log shows the last full cycle was 22 days ago. We've had a busy month. She looked at me in a way that made me feel I'd said something slightly foolish without being sure exactly what it was. I'm not criticizing, she said. I'm noting the difference matters. I'll take that under advisement. She almost smiled. Small thing. The corner of her mouth, a slight shift in her jaw, and it was gone quickly. But I noted it because it was the first time, and the first time is always the one you remember. What I didn't know, what I had no reason to know, was that on the 4th day after transfusion, a biological log that the Velserath warrior caste maintains on all active members had flagged. The flag was automatic. It had been triggered by cellular markers of transfusion left in her system, markers that old law recognized, old law that was designed to recognize them. The Velserath Warrior Compact, Article 14, a document I had never read, governs what happens when a warrior of the caste receives blood from an outsider in conditions of mortal emergency. It was written in a time when warrior caste members were sometimes the only survivors of battlefield disasters, when they were sometimes found and tended by people outside the caste, when the question of what obligation ran between a life given and a life preserved needed a legal answer. The law's answer was this: blood freely given in mortal emergency binds the giver to the recipient's lineage. If the recipient's body accepts the foreign blood, a biological event recorded in the recipient's own cells and impossible to falsify, then the giver is recognized as Velserath Keth, a bonded member of the warrior line by act of blood, carrying all rights and obligations that attach to that standing, including, if the recipient later bore a child, acknowledgement as the second parent in the compact's lineage record. The flag reached her house's administrative record on the 5th day. The delegation arrived on the 7th. 4 of them, 3 in formal house livery, deep gray with copper thread at the collar. The 4th was an advocate named Velkaroth Dune, with the particular stillness of someone who has spent a professional lifetime looking for angles and finding them. Corvith came to find me in the outer bay. I could tell from the way he walked that whatever was happening wasn't routine. I went in. Ethan was sitting upright on the recovery bench in plain gray travel clothes. Nothing that would identify her rank to someone who didn't already know it. She was watching the delegation with the same focused stillness she'd used on the operations manual. The advocate looked at me. You are Sorenvale, the medic who treated the patient. I am. You administered human blood product to a Velserath warrior caste member in trauma conditions. You were aware of the warrior caste biological bonding provision under Article 14 of the Velserath Warrior Compact. I looked at him. I looked at Ethan. Her expression hadn't changed. I was not, I said. You are aware of it now, he said, and handed me a document. I read it once for the surface and again for the weight. The language was formal and layered the way very old law is layered. Centuries of legal scholars tucking their annotations into the body of the original text until the original and the commentary are inseparable. Part of my mind, throughout, was occupied with a slow understanding that this was what she'd meant 3 days ago. It may become one. I hadn't pressed her for the answer then, because it seemed like something she needed to hold at her own pace. I had respected that without knowing what I was respecting. I set the document down and looked at her. You knew, I said, not an accusation, a factual observation. I knew the law existed, she said. I didn't know at the moment you gave the blood whether my body would accept it under the provision's terms. The acceptance is biological, not chosen. It either occurs or it doesn't. And it occurred. Yes. When were you going to tell me? I was determining, she said carefully, what I want to do about it. The advocate cleared his throat. The House's position is that this bond, while technically activated, was entered into without the full knowledge of either party and should be administratively dissolved. The provision doesn't have an administrative dissolution mechanism. Ethan said, the House is prepared to pursue a challenge before the Cast Council. The House can pursue whatever it likes, she said. The question before this room is not what the House wants. The question is what Article 14 requires and what I choose. The advocate's stillness took on a different quality. He reminded her, with a particular tone of someone who thinks their arguments are irresistible, of her succession position, the disputed House politics, the faction that had ambushed her transport, and the fact that she was on a border installation because the primary line had tried to remove her from the Keth Varun negotiation. I am a Velserath warrior, she said. Her voice was level and steady and completely final. The provision applies to Velserath warriors. My standing under it is not contingent on the House's approval. I said, what does it mean for me in practical terms? Ethan looked at me. It means that under the Warrior Compact, you are Velserath Keth to this House, bonded to the lineage by the act of blood given in my emergency. The House cannot erase that without your consent and mine. I looked at the document again. If the recipient subsequently bears a child. Yes, she said quietly. I became aware of it 4 days ago. I was still determining. The room was very quiet. I have been a trauma medic for 11 years. I know how to stay functional in the gap between action and understanding. I know how to hold the weight of a situation at arm's length long enough to do what needs doing. What I found, sitting in that room on a boredom moon with a document in my hand, and a woman looking at me with amber eyes that weren't performing anything at all, was that I did want to hold this one at arm's length. I put the document down. What do you want? I said, to her, not the advocate, not to the administrative staff. To her. She looked at me for a long moment. I was told growing up, she said, that the Warrior Compact's bonding provision was obsolete, not invoked in 400 years, kept in the law only because removing it would require a Cast Council vote no one wanted to convene. A pause. I was not told it was written the way it was written, because the people who wrote it understood something my House has apparently forgotten. What did they understand? That when someone gives you their blood to keep you alive, she said, and asks nothing in return except that you don't die, that is not a transaction. The old law was trying to name what it actually is. The advocate began a sentence. Ethan raised one hand, palm out. He stopped. I will file a formal statement of recognition, she said, looking at me. Under Article 14, the Velserath Keth must be named by the recipient before the cast record. It is the recipient's act, not the House's. I am prepared to make it now, before these witnesses. And she did. She named me 3 times, in the formal address form, each repetition adding a layer of recognition. The first acknowledged the act. The second named the person. The third bound the record. Soren Vale, I name you as the one who gave blood freely in my mortal emergency, who did not ask who I was before he acted, because the question before him was not who I was, but whether I would live. I name you as Velserath Keth to this House, and to my lineage. The blood you gave was given without condition. The acceptance my body made was without coercion. Soren Vale, by the Velserath Warrior Compact, Article 14 in full terms, before these witnesses, I name you as the acknowledged blood bond of this line, and as the second parent of the child of this lineage. This naming is my act and my choice, made in full knowledge of its terms, without compulsion, and without administrative dissolution available after the fact. She lowered her hand. The advocate was very still. She turned to him. The naming is made and witnessed. The record will be filed today. A pause. I suggest the House's legal staff review the full text of Article 14 before advising the challenge, because the administrative dissolution section they intend to invoke was repealed in the third reformulation. It no longer exists. Another pause. I had time to read the full text. They left, all 4 of them. When the outer bay door closed, The room was quiet, just a filtration hum, and the monitor ticking along the baseline it was supposed to tick along at. I sat down on the stool beside the instrument bench. "The child," I said. "You're certain?" "The station scanner confirmed it 2 days ago. I used the equipment in the early morning. I didn't ask Corvette to run the panel. I want to be certain myself before I told anyone." A pause. "I have been certain for 48 hours. "How far?" 6 weeks at most. The timing is consistent with the transfusion event. I looked at the scanner, sitting quiet on the bench. "I don't know anything about Velcerath pregnancy. I will teach you what I know," she said. "Some of it will require you to read documents that are not as accessible as an operations manual. I will help you locate them." Something in the way she said it, the absolute matter-of-factness, the implicit assumption that we would be in the same location long enough to read documents together, sat in my chest in a way I didn't immediately have words for. "You want to stay?" I said. "This installation has a qualified trauma medic," she said. "A functioning medical bay. A filtration system now running on schedule. It is on a contested border moon, which is relevant to my work. And the man who kept me alive is here." She looked at me steadily. "I have been exiled from the primary house for 2 years. I have been living on transport vessels and borrowed clearance. Since the ambush at Kevvarun, I have been determining whether there is a place in this region where I could stop determining, and simply be somewhere." A pause. "I think this is it. I think," she said, "that a man who asks what I want rather than what the law requires, who gave blood to a stranger because she was dying, and who sat down on a stool after hearing, he is Velcerath kept to a warrior house and the second parent a child he didn't know he was going to have, and did not run, is the kind of person next to whom a place can be a place. I am not romantic," she added. "I want to be accurate about that. I am telling you a practical thing. You are the kind of person I would choose to be near if I were choosing. I am choosing now." "The distinction matters," I said. "Good," she said. "Then we are in agreement about what this is." The CAS Council convened 26 days later at the Velcerath Primary Court, on the second moon of the Velcerath home system, in a stone chamber that had been used for CAS proceedings longer than most governments in this region have existed. The benches were worn smooth in the center from centuries of people sitting in them. Those 26 days were the most education-dense period of my adult life. Ethan did not simplify. She assumed you were capable of handling the full complexity of a thing if given sufficient time and a well-organized presentation of material. She walked me through the CAS Council's procedural rules, the Article 14 precedents, and the specific weaknesses in the House's challenge. She annotated documents and handed them to me. I annotated them further. She read my annotations and corrected my errors and confirmed what I'd understood correctly. I recognized slowly, not that different from how I train a junior medic in a new procedure. Methodical, patient, precise, with the assumption that competence is achievable if approached correctly. Corvette said nothing about any of it. He ran the station, kept the filtration on schedule, and left tea on the secondary terminal at the correct intervals without comment. At the council, Ethan stated her standing, stated the facts of the emergency, stated that the biological acceptance had occurred and was recorded in her own cells and could not be disputed. Then she said, "The Velcerath Keth is present and prepared to speak under provision standing." I stood. I delivered the formal address form exactly as I had practiced it. 7 lines, each one specifying a different aspect of the Velcerath Keth's standing and intention. Then I said what Ethan had asked me to say in my own words, that I gave blood to keep someone alive, that I didn't ask who she was before I acted, that I would do it again, and that I did not consider the consequences of that act to be a mistake. The council chair looked at me afterward. Not the way a judge looks at a witness they're preparing a challenge, but the way someone looks at something they haven't seen before and are deciding how to categorize. "You were aware," she said, "that cross-species transfusion carries documented risks." "Yes." "And you assessed those risks against the alternative?" "Against watching her die, because I was too cautious to try." "Yes." The chamber was quiet when I sat back down. The council deliberated for 2 hours. The ruling was that the Velcerath Keth bond under Article 14 was validly activated. The formal naming had been made in the correct sequence before sufficient witnesses. The challenge did not present ground sufficient to dissolve the provision, whose terms were clearly met. The child's lineage would be recorded under both lines in the Warrior Compact's register, with full standing on both sides. When the council members had filed out, Ethan sat still in the worn stone chamber for a moment longer, looking at the empty benches with the expression of someone who's been carrying a weight and is deciding whether to believe it's been set down. I didn't say anything. I had learned over 26 days of preparing documents and reading cast law and sitting in a station on a border moon with a woman who annotated everything she read, that she preferred to complete her own assessments before the conversation resumed. "It is done," she said finally. "Yes." She turned and looked at me, the amber eyes steady in the even light. "The station," she said. "I would like to go back to it. Corvith will have the filtration on schedule." I said. She stood. Sorvith came forward from the back of the chamber. The three of us walked out of the Velserath primary court into the morning of the second moon, clear and cold and very bright. I don't have a word for what I felt then. That isn't also the word for what I feel in particular moments after stabilization holds. When you've done everything you could do and the person on the table is still breathing and the monitor is ticking at the baseline it's supposed to tick at. The weight of the previous hours hasn't lifted exactly, but it has shifted into something you can carry forward rather than something you're fighting against. It isn't happiness, exactly. It's something more durable than happiness. It's the knowledge that the thing you did was worth doing, and that the consequences of it, however unexpected, are real and present and yours. Ethan stopped at the top of the steps. "Soren Vale," she said. "Yes." "The child will need a name. In the Velserath Warrior Compact, the Velserath Keth parent names a child for the Compact Register. It is considered the Bonded Parents Act." I looked at the clear, cold sky of the second moon, a sky I had not expected to be standing under a month ago. "I'll need some time to think about it," I said. "You have 12 months, she said. "That should be enough." She went down the steps. Sorvith followed. I stood for a moment at the top, looking at the transit platform below and the border transport that would take us back to the station. And then I went down after them, because the station was where we were going, and the station was, it appeared, where I was going to be. The child was born 13.5 months later in the station's medical bay, which I had by then upgraded with matched Velserath equipment, applied for through the Velserath Keth Logistical Support Clause in the appendix of Article 14, which the Compact Medical Corps had been surprised but not unwilling to accommodate. Sorvith was there. Corvith was there. I was there. Ethan named the child in the Velserath form, the warrior name, the lineage name, the house acknowledgement. Then she looked at me with the amber eyes that I had watched change over 13 months. From the guarded stillness of someone still measuring the distance back from the edge, to the steady presence of someone who had stopped measuring. "Your turn," she said. I spoke the name I had chosen into the Compact Register, a plain name, carrying nothing except the sound of it and the intention with which it was given. Ethan listened. She looked down at the child, and then back at me. "I chose well," she said. The filtration system hummed at the correct cycle interval. The monitor ticked along at the baseline. Outside the window, the border moon's morning was coming in, pale and ordinary, in exactly the right kind of light. And